As the ominous cloud of load shedding continues to hover over South Africa, the conversation about renewable energy has become more pressing. Eskom has just secured a 2.5 billion rand loan to integrate renewable energy into the grid. But is it a viable solution to our energy crisis? Can we cheaply and effectively store energy from renewable resources? Joining me in the studio is energy advisor Tsepo Khadima. In our Cape Town studio, we have Stellenbosch University Director at Centre for Renewable and Sustainable Energy, Samson Mapwele. Let me start off with you, Samson. Why are we so dependent on Eskom in this day and age? I mean, where are we as far as renewable energy is concerned?
Good evening to you and the viewers. The reason why we're dependent on Eskom to this day is because of the legislation. Government legislation doesn't allow mainly independent power producers to produce power and sell directly to the municipalities, for instance, and also to government. So electricity production was seen as a strategic kind of sector by government. So government wanted to have control over electricity generation, distribution and transmission, mainly to protect the economy. And
look where it's got us. It's doing just the opposite, isn't it? Tsepo Khadima, why are we not free from Eskom yet? What do you think is holding us back?
Well, to understand why we're not free from Eskom, or why we shouldn't be free from Eskom, one has to read the book which was compiled by Alan Morgan, the former CEO of Eskom, called The Symphony of Power. The title of the book itself is both descriptive as well as definitive, taking into account the geographical makeup of South Africa and the landmass of South Africa. It, unfortunately, for those that are wanting to be in bringing about intermittent energy sources, you find that intermittent energy sources are not appropriate for the grid of South Africa as so designed to conform with the geographical spread of South Africa. So certainly if you look at...
be changed?
Well, all of that could be changed, but if you take into account, I think the other guest is raising the issue that can the independent power producers be allowed to sell renewable energy into the municipalities? And the simple reason is that if you take into account the consideration from the Municipal Finance Management Act, it will make it expensive and therefore prohibitive for them to be able to take on that power directly there. So the legislation already is in place. It should therefore not surprise us that we currently have the energy policy of South Africa that designates Eskom as the procurer or the purchaser of electricity from renewable sources from the IPPs. But is that appropriate? The answer is no. And hence right now, this very day is not an April Fool's joke. Electricity has gone up by 9.41%, taking into account the liquid fuels that are going up tomorrow. Unfortunately, this country now continues to be in a state of arrested development as a result.
Something clearly needs to be changed. A lot of people are saying renewable energy is the key for this, Samson. I mean, is it key? Can it help us? And how would it help us?
Yes, renewable energy is obviously the future. If you look at some advanced economies such as China, for instance, they've already indicated that the fourth industrial revolution is going to be powered by renewable energy. The main aspect is resource assessment, which we have done as South Africa. We've looked at the availability of resources. We've looked at the intermittency of renewable energy resources. Factoring all those aspects in, one can safely say that renewable energy can safely provide about 40 to 45% of South Africa's energy needs. If you look at countries such as Germany, for instance, those countries, they took advantage of the little resources that they had, which is way less than what we have in South Africa. So in terms of the issue of intermittency, that can be dealt with by forecasting, for instance, where we do renewable energy forecasting, and then we look at, that way we can be able to establish as to when are we going to have wind blowing, for instance, in what parts of the country. When are we going to have the sun shining in what parts of the country. And factoring all those aspects and then taking, say, for instance, the coal power stations as base load then we can be able to factor renewable energy systems in.
Wow, Tsepo, that sounds wonderful, doesn't it? An extra 40% of energy. The cost is a factor here, though, isn't it?
Well, even the 40%, that will be like doing a Mission Impossible 7 of Tom Cruise. It is absolutely impossible for one simple reason. All intermittent energy sources in South Africa require 100% backup. That means you need to have, in our case, a base load supply of energy to back up those intermittent energy sources. So the 40%, in fact, right now, as we are here, all energy that is fed into the grid, because the design of our grid is in fact a higher voltage grid than they even have in Germany, it means that 100% of the power that is supplied directly into the high voltage grid gets lost. It does not end up to any consumer, either industrial or mine. And the viewers can ask themselves a question. Northern Cape has got a line that goes into Western Cape from the iron ore mining towns to Saldanha. If renewable energy was indeed the solution, that line should have been running on renewable energy. There's a good reason why it's not running on renewable energy for those reasons, for the reasons I'm mentioning, because you have to understand the relationship between voltage, current, as well as frequency. And when you understand those intricacies, you realize that the policy that we have employed in this country is really erroneous in the extreme, in that it ends up in these losses, and hence Eskom is effectively losing 100% of the power that it pays for from renewables, and at the same time the consumer at home is effectively paying for something that never gets delivered. So energy poverty in South Africa has increased as a result of having adopted the policy on renewables as we have implemented in the current form.
Okay, so Samson, what needs to be done? I mean, obviously the policy needs to be changed. How do you plug those gaps? How do you bring the expense down? How do you make it work off their grid?
Yeah, I hear Tsepo talking about issues of frequency and voltage. Back then we used to have those kind of challenges of different frequencies and different voltages coming into the grid, and what the Eskom system will do, it will simply reject whatever power is coming in if it's not in the same frequency, if it's not in the same voltage. These days we've got technology to rectify that. So that is no longer a problem at all. The issue of base load, yes, we agree that we need base load to a certain extent, but if you do your power system simulation properly, you will be able to tell as to when are you going to have wind, for instance, when are you going to have your solar shining, for instance, and where. So looking at all those aspects, it's quite easy to integrate renewable energy into the grid and still be able to provide up to 40–45% of South Africa's energy needs from renewable energy systems.
Okay, so obviously
in terms of the policy,
okay.
There is.
Carry on.
There is a need for policy shift that will, to an extent that we need to also encourage kind of generation of energy by households, for instance. So there is a need for us to incentivize or to encourage rooftop PVs for households, for instance, that can feed into the grid using the correct frequencies.
Let me bring Tsepo in here. I mean, how can we, you, me, make it better? Because the alternative is pretty expensive, isn't it?
Well, taking into account, I think, the socio-economic conditions of South Africa, that also becomes, it's very prohibitive to install rooftop solar on your roof if it's going to cost you anywhere between 25 and 30,000 rand in the very minimum, and some of the systems require an even larger capital outlay. So therefore it's outside of reach of the majority of the people of this country. What we need as a country, and in order to be able to continue to industrialize, we need baseload power for reliability, but it must be done so environmentally in a sustainable manner, and also the price has to be within limit. We cannot as a country afford a situation we've seen in the last 10 years where electricity tariffs have increased in excess of 300% and continuing to increase. That has to be arrested, because energy, electricity specifically, it is a chapter 2 of the Constitution right, which, as Earth Life has already said it in 2008, that indeed it must be declared to be a fundamental human right. So therefore, the majority of the people of this country, they need to move away from having to use coal in the form of mbaula and paraffin, and just to get heat at home, or even using biomass. We need to ensure that electricity is within access. Thank you.
I agree. Tsepo, Khadima and Samson Mapweli, thank you very much. That's our show for tonight. News is next.